Hello and welcome back to Stat 7 Sports. My name's Caleb, also known as the Contained Kunas. I'm going to try that out, see how that rolls. And this time I'll be going through the NFC Divisional round matchups, where this is the remaining bracket for the rest of the NFL playoffs. I'm going to end up discussing the AFC in the next video, but in this one we'll be talking about the Minnesota Vikings against the 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks going to Lambeau against the Green Bay Packers. I'll start off with that Minnesota and San Francisco matchup, as it is the first game going on this Saturday. But this is going to be the matchup of two teams with not very experienced quarterbacks in the postseason. As Kirk Cousins just got his first win in the postseason against the Saints last week, and Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't started a game, hasn't played a game in the playoffs. He's backed up Tom Brady for a bunch whenever he was in New England, but he hasn't had any playoff experience himself. So for this first matchup, you get the 13-3 49ers going against the now 11-6 Minnesota Vikings after the Vikings beat the Saints 26-20 in overtime. Now, I am going to try something a bit different off of this, where I'm going to go off of multiple games within each team's seasons and try to explaining what has been their weaknesses in these matchups, where for the 49ers, they've only had 3 losses. So I'm going to discuss what happened in those 3 games. And for the Vikings, I'll do the same thing. Now, we have Minnesota is a 7-point underdog off of this game. And with this game being in San Francisco, with Minnesota being, they've been underrated a lot of the season, especially for the fact that they have Kirk Cousins at the helm, where he's been known not to be able to win any big games. All the Monday night games he's lost. He's 0-9 in those games. A bunch of night matchup. Every night matchup, he seems to struggle, which almost makes it not so surprising that Cousins actually end up winning a day game. But in this case, with the 3:30 matchup Saturday afternoon, you have a balanced offense for San Francisco with Jimmy Garoppolo and his 3 running back targets of Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman, and Raheem Mostert, who's really come on towards the ending part of the year. With his wide receiver core, with Emmanuel Sanders, that was a great trade during the trade deadline. And Deebo Samuel becoming more of a factor. Kendrick Bourne becoming a big factor. And George Kittle becoming this year's Rob Gronkowski. Now the Vikings are finally getting people healthy, with Dalvin Cook looking impressive last week against the Saints, 96 yards rushing against a team that hasn't given up 100 rushing yards in 43 straight games now. So, and Adam Thielen was obviously struggling through the last part of the year. He wasn't much of a factor during those games, which ends up leading to why they end up struggling against the Packers, losing 23-10, with Cousins really having no connections with any offensive weapons outside of Stephon Diggs. Now, the 49ers started off the season 8-0, and they were rolling along their schedule, giving up 12 points per game, where their defense was suffocating everyone. Then they got hit with injuries between Quan Alexander, Dee Ford, and other members of their defensive line that after the first half of the year, the second half, they gave up double the points, and they went from averaging 4 sacks a game to just over 2 sacks a game in the last half. Now, last week against the Saints, the Vikings were able to get consistent pressure against Drew Brees with Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter. They each had a sack and a half each, and between the fumble that Brees had in the red zone during one of the key possessions in the fourth quarter, and the fact that most if not all the game outside of Taysom Hill, the Saints had no running game. Kind of shows that the Vikings are back to being healthy and being a stout defense, which they were a solid defense this year, giving up just 19 points a game. And the Saints actually have one of the best offensive lines in the league. They only give up 25 sacks in the entire season, which is tied for third in the league. The 49ers are actually more middle of the pack, so it actually does favor more of the Vikings in that perspective, where the Vikings DNs and the rest of the defensive line should be able to at least build some more pressure on Garoppolo. But with the 49ers being able to get extra rest, being able to get their playmakers on defense back, Dee Ford is a great pass rusher, and Quan Alexander is a very athletic, elusive linebacker that can take care of a lot of the running back routes and end up handling some of the Kyle Rudolph plays and make a lot of plays in space. So in this case, there's very few situations that the 49ers have actually done poorly during the season. In their 3 games, the one versus the Seahawks, they gave up 5 sacks per game against a team that is not a strong team at pressuring the quarterback. That's at the point where Clowney was close to the most healthy, and they did get 5 sacks in the game and caused the 49ers to have 2 fumbles and 1 interception in the game. Now, the Ravens game, which was probably one of the best games in the entire season, the 49ers game against the Saints also withstanding on that. I may have preferred the Saints winning it, but that was a very good game. It was a shootout. But for this 49ers-Ravens game, that game just went back and forth, where whoever made the mistake first was going to end up losing the game. And that one fumble plus a Ravens defense that could get pressure on Garoppolo made it a tough loss for San Francisco, but it really did affect them in the long term, getting a first round bye. Now, the only one of their losses that kind of you feel like you have to question is the fact that they end up losing to the Falcons, and also another 13-3 team losing to the Falcons unexpectedly was the Saints. And with a lot of the statistical analysis off of it, the 49ers actually, they control most of it. They had 2 fumbles in a game, which really didn't go in their favor, and the Falcons really couldn't put that much pressure on Garoppolo. But the one thing that Frisco couldn't do, they couldn't sustain drives throughout the game. They're only converting a third or third down conversions. Whenever Atlanta just had those long extended drives in their entire game, where with a healthy defense, that may be a bit more equal and definitely would fit in the favor of San Francisco off of it. It was a 7-point victory at the time, but you do also have to realize the Falcons got a last-second 2-point conversion to give them a 1-point lead, and then the 49ers are trying a hook and ladder idea on the kickoff return that ended up being a last-second touchdown for Atlanta. So 8-point margin that really was closer than it actually ended up being. But all of their losses very competitive, and outside of that Falcons one, it's not surprising that they lost them just because they went against such strong competition. For the Vikings, it's actually a bit easier to explain. Yes, the Vikings have 6 losses, but I thought these 3 here, between the first matchup against the Packers, the matchup against the Chiefs and the matchup against the Seahawks, they kind of illustrate a lot of the issues that the Vikings had this season in their losses. Now, I do understand that they lost both their games to the Packers, but that second matchup, it was Cousins without a healthy Thielen, without a healthy Dalvin Cook, without a healthy Alexander Madison, which are all going to be back for this game. And whenever you end up getting 4 turnovers against the Packers week 2, and the Packers controlled the clock off of it, you had to get Cousins to have a very strong game to be able to actually stay competitive in it, and 14 for 32 ain't gonna cut it. 2 interceptions, that's terrible. I don't care what your yardage on it is. If you have those stats, it's not going to be a good day. Now, I bring up week 9 against the Chiefs because the Chiefs lost. The Chiefs had Matt Moore as their starter, who torched the Vikings, who controlled the time of possession. Like, yes, they lost. The Vikings won the turnover margin off of it, but Damian Williams, who is a very good back, he still ran for 125 yards. Kirk Cousins actually had a solid game, yardage and touchdown wise. No interceptions, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns. But when you're completing for 50%, you can't complete for 50% in an NFL game and expect to win. I'll go on the Packers later on that with Aaron Rodgers because he's had games that he's barely completed over 50%, and they win those games. But Kirk Cousins does not have to be superhuman on it, because if they're trying to make him be superhuman on it, they're not going to be able to beat the 49ers. Because under pressure, Cousins can't. He has not been able to play consistently enough through an entire game to carry the entire team without other help. Whereas that's where I go with the last game against the Seahawks here, where they had 3 turnovers off of it. They gave up 218 yards to a Seahawks team that had Chris Carson, that had Rashad Penny, and it had Russell Wilson still going with the scramble drill. Cousins actually had a very good game. 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. About a little over 60% completion rate. That's one game you had to get Cousins to have a superhuman effort. Because whenever you're almost being doubled in time of possession, unless you can score at will on offense, just with that short of time with the ball, your defense is getting demolished, and they're getting worn out. They got worn out in that game as it went on. And you just didn't have enough time with the ball. So I think in this game, the 49ers, they've both consistently controlled time possession. They're one of the best in time possession in the league. If I'm mistaken, they might be number 1. Well, they might be number 2 to the Ravens. Because with their rushing attack through Lamar Jackson, they could control the clock and shorten the game in their favor. But with the trio of wide receivers between Bourne, Samuel, and Sanders, and the tight end George Kittle, and Breida, Mostert, and Coleman at running back, it's going to be too many weapons for the Vikings defense to be able to stop. I do think that Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter is going to be able to get pressure on Garoppolo some. He'll probably make one one mistake in the game. You'll probably see that one interception. But I think Cousins is going to also make a turnover in this game. And even where Cook was doing well against the Saints last week, whenever he finally got healthy, he had 82 yards in the first half, 96 for the game. So a part of that is not having the game time of recency. So with another week under the belt, it might get a bit easier on him to consistently have strong rushing attack through the entire game, and Madison as well. But the Saints were without two of their big defensive line of last week, with Sheldon Rankins being out for the year and Marcus Davenport. The 49ers, in this case, getting everyone back, and they're getting one of their best run-stopping defenders back with Quan Alexander. He's going to be, if he's healthy, he's going to be very big in this game. But I don't think Cousins is going to be able to make enough plays to make up for, while a solid pass rush, a solid pass protection off the line, a middling rush offense. Because Cook was still only able to get 3.4 yards per carry. 26 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I think after a while, the 49ers can just kind of control the clock, dwindle it down, and Cousins trying to push things down the field with Diggs. Like, he's gonna get yardage to Thielen, to Rudolph, and Diggs is gonna get better numbers than he did against the Saints. He was a non-factor against the Saints. Sherman at this part of the career is not as good as Marcus Lattimore. I know I'm putting my own take on it, but I think Lattimore's a better cornerback at this point in his career. Sherman has lost a step, even though he is a very solid man defender. But as a whole, the 49ers defense is better than the Saints, and the Vikings really should be able to score at least 30 in that game last week. And I think that's what it's going to have to take for Minnesota to win this game, and I don't see it happening. So I'm going to pick the 49ers to win this one with a 27-17 game. Now, I went a little long on that one now, but I am going into the more interesting matchup between the Seahawks and the Packers. Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, 2 quarterbacks, plenty of playoff experience. Both have a Super Bowl trophy. Both have been Super Bowl MVPs. And both teams nearly having a second Super Bowl. So Russell Wilson having to go through his lack of a running game, his Legion of Boom being gone, separated between other teams, between Earl Thomas going to the Ravens, Richard Sherman going to the 49ers, Cam Chancellor retiring, Brandon Browner being out of the league, and really only having Bobby Wagner left from that core of the team. And he is still one of the best linebackers in the league, very strong tackler. But that rushing attack for the Seahawks offense, Marshawn Lynch, he's been out of the league for a couple years. You can tell he does not have the same burst that he used to have. He is not beast mode of old. And between Travis Homer at running back, and between they really haven't used Robert Turner since they signed him. It's really been a Russell Wilson run show. He's getting the rushing yards. He's getting all the scramble drills to get the ball downfield for DK Metcalf, Jack Hollister, Tyler Lockett, and it's putting a lot of pressure on him. And Wilson has delivered very well. It's starting to take a toll later in the season, but they're still able to beat the Eagles, who it was the battle of the injury bug. Whoever got hurt last in that game. Now, the game's in Lambeau, so because it's two teams with a lot of playoff experience, Wilson's used to be playing up north, and Packers used to playing in Lambeau. Packers finally have a running game and a solid defense around Rodgers. Aaron Jones, 19 touchdowns, nearly broke the Packers record. And Russell Wilson is probably going to be second in MVP voting. Rodgers has been underwhelming this year. With new coach Matt LaFleur, whenever they replaced Mike McCarthy, they were supposed to get a new dynamic offense that was going to fit him more, a better scheme for him. And really, it has been a better scheme, but it's not really because of Rodgers. Really, the only person that Rodgers has been able to actually complete passes to consistently was Devontae Adams, which is very similar to the Drew Brees to Michael Thomas issue that the Saints have. But a lot of games the Packers are able to win, it's because you get Aaron Jones being able to go for over 100 yards or get multiple touchdowns in the game, where he's one of the best goal line backs, and once you get close to the red zone, he's going to end up scoring more often than not. Now, whenever they actually have to throw the ball, and whenever they get down early in games, they have more issue off of it, because 2 games against the Chargers and the 49ers mid to late part of the season, they were held scoreless in the first half, where Aaron Rodgers barely threw for over 100 yards in both of those games. Both of them ended up being blowout losses for him. 106 yards against the 49ers and 160 against the Chargers, give or take. Now they've only lost 3 games on the season somehow. They have so many close calls that they barely win. That's yes, they're the better team. And you often think there has to be a point where they just click and everything works. It works out and they just blow a team out. Later part of the season, you have a very simple schedule where they haven't played many teams with winning records or made the playoffs. They've lost 2 of those games. They lost to the Eagles, they lost to the 49ers. They nearly lost to the Chiefs, but the Chiefs were playing Matt Moore, backup quarterback. So that could have potentially been another loss. They nearly lost to the Lions, wherever they're losing 17-3 in Week 17 against David Blau, the Lions' third-string quarterback, which later in the season, later parts of that game, that whole second half, he could not do anything, which part of that is a credit on the Packers' defense, but it's also a detriment for the fact that the Packers could not just flip that switch and just take it to a substandard team, because the Lions are a substandard team this year. They went 3-12-1. They're going to have a top 5 pick in this coming draft. They're not good. Unfortunately, in my favor. Then you have the Bears with Mitchell Trubisky. Both games, 1 possession finishes. The Bears got within 3 yards of winning that game, or at least going for 2 points to end up tying that, sending into overtime. Sure, it's more of a hook and ladder pass back and forth, trying to just get anyone in the end zone. But Mr. Trubisky's not good. At best, you can call him the third best quarterback in that class, and it's not even close between the top two. Because the top two were Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, both who were in these playoffs as the 1 and 2 seeds, respectively, in the AFC. You could say Trubisky made them the 3 seed last year for the Bears, but the masses have been able to tell that he's regressed. The offense of Matt Nagy's regressed, but I'm talking too much of the Bears. They barely beat the Redskins 20-15, and this was at the point where Dwayne Haskins still didn't know how to be a quarterback in the NFL. So there's so many games that it's so tight of a game that it shouldn't be. With all the talent on this roster, they should be blowing these teams out, or at least being more impressive with their wins. Rodgers is not being accurate with the ball. Barely over 62% completion percentage. Only really being able to get the ball to Devontae Adams, who was hurt mid part of the season. I get that. And has been healthy towards the later part. But for the most part, they haven't been able to pull off a complete game. Even with the game against the Vikings that decided a division in Week 16. Yes, they won 23-10. The Vikings had no offense. They held the Vikings offense to barely over 150 yards. But Kirk Cousins didn't have Diggs, he had Diggs, he didn't have Thielen, he didn't have Cook, he didn't have Alexander Madison. They relied on Mike Boone. The Packers still had 3 turnovers in that game. It was a 1-point game at the half. It shouldn't have been even that close. At some point, it's got to bite them. And I honestly think that's going to be this week. The Packers are going as a team that has not been able to get a pass rush almost the entire season. And whoever ends up building the lead in this game early, I don't think there's a comeback, because if the Packers struggle early, they haven't shown the consistency to be able to come back against a good team. Honestly, same thing with the Seahawks, where Seahawks in the later part of the year, they played the Rams, the Cardinals, and the 49ers. They trailed early in the game by double digits in all 3 of the games. Sure, part of that has come due to the lack of a running game, through losing time of possession, through their defense getting beat up on it. But they lost their 3 last games against their division. Maybe it's just they don't need to be playing against their division. And in this case, they're not. Seattle is used to playing up in the cold. And the Packers have not shown consistency to beat a winning team that is not the Minnesota Vikings. So this one, I'm saying a close game, but I think Russell Wilson is going to make enough plays to come out on top on this one. He's got a clutch gene that's he'll find plays where he needs them. Rodgers is actually getting older. His age is starting to show at a younger point than Breeze, Manning, Brady, as they're just taking the age hit now. And Manning's retired for a couple years. But, yeah. I'm going to pick the Seahawks with a close 21-20 matchup. This one's going to be fun. If the Packers can get a consistent running game on it, they can control the pace. I'm not saying that it's completely one-sided on it. I don't expect it to be. But Rodgers has not shown that he can win big games this season. And whenever they played strong competition, they folded under the pressure. Aaron Jones hasn't been able to show up. So their offensive line hasn't been able to build a run block for him to be able to get forward. Jamal Williams has been able to help them off and on during the year, and I doubt he's going to be that much of a factor in this game. I think Russell Wilson's going to be able to do enough on the ground and be able to get his receivers open with scramble drills and his rushing attack to get past this Packers secondary that has been suspect off and on, and a rush defense that has struggled later in the year. But if you did like this, I'll finish up real quickly. This is my NFC Divisional Round predictions. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe. I will be giving more content in the near future. The AFC Divisional Round will be coming soon. And with most fans around here, y'all have interest in a different reaction off of what I think what's going to happen with LSU Clemson. I'm going to go into detail on my opinions on that. Put that out hopefully very shortly. But I'll post that on my Facebook for now. I'll get my other socials ready. I'll set up an Instagram for it, and I'll set up another Twitter. But for now, my name's Caleb. This is the Contained Kunas on Stat Stuff and Gaming. Signing out. See y'all later.